Hi, I'm Andrew Parr, Senior Policy Analyst for the State Board of Education. I've prepared a presentation on the indicators of educational system health, more widely known as Senate Bill 5491, that was signed into law in the 2013 legislative session. I will first speak to you on the authority and requirements of the State Board of Education in Senate Bill 5491, and then I'll present on the status of each indicator and how Washington compares nationally and to peer states on similar measures. So let's just move right into the presentation. Senate Bill 5491 was signed into law in 2013 and tasked the State Board of Education with monitoring the Washington K-12 educational system through the examination of 6 key performance indicators. The State Board of Education was identified as the lead agency for this work, but was directed in the legislation to work with a number of other agencies and groups. Senate Bill 5491 requires that the State Board of Education submit an initial report in December 2013 and biennial reports beginning in December 2014. As provided for in Senate Bill 5491 and included in the initial report to the legislature, the State Board recommended revisions to the educational system health indicators. These revisions will be discussed later in the video as the status of each indicator is presented. Senate Bill 5491 requires that the State Board of Education carefully analyze the educational system health indicators in several important ways. First, for each indicator, the State Board of Education must determine whether the annual targets for the all students group and the ESEA subgroups were met. Next, we must determine whether Washington's performance is in the top 10% nationally, and then we must determine whether Washington's performance is comparable to the Global Challenge peer states. More on the peer states in just a moment. If any indicator is not meeting each of these thresholds, the State Board of Education must recommend evidence-based reforms intended to improve student performance on the underperforming indicator in the biennial report. So this slide shows the peer states, and you can see that some of these are real educational powerhouses. The number in parentheses along the side of each state represents the national educational ranking of each of the states from the 2014 Kids Count Data Book. In that analysis, Washington is ranked as 20th best in the nation. Remember, as we're going through these slides, we're looking for educational comparability with these peer states and/or the top 10% nationally. It becomes quite clear that the legislature has aspirations for one of the best educational systems in the country. This slide is a screenshot of our index website, and the State Board of Education is reporting this information in a transparent manner through this public website. Before looking at the status of each indicator, I think it's important to quickly review how the goals were established and set. Just so you know, this type of goal setting would pass peer review and meet the industry standard. This is a little more complex slide, and it's intended to show you some of the elements of setting the midpoint, endpoint, and annual targets. The baseline here is the average of the 2012 and 2013 measures, and see how the baseline differs for each subgroup. The 2020 midpoint is 1/2 of the total gap to 100%. Again, the midpoint target differs for each subgroup, and see how the gap narrows if the annual targets are met by each group. The 2027 endpoint shows how all groups converge to the 2027 goal of 100% attainment if annual targets are met. This type of target and goal setting results in 2 important phenomena. First, lower performing groups must show larger gains over the entire time frame. In this case, the white children must improve by about 52 percentage points to attain the 2027 goal of 100% meeting standard, and the children with disabilities must improve by about 82 percentage points over the same time period. The second point, lower performing groups must show greater gains each year, almost 4 points per year for the white children and almost 6 points per year for children with disabilities. So now I will start moving through each of the indicators, and you will typically see a table and at least one chart for each of the key performance indicators. This measure is the percentage of children meeting standard on all 6 domains of the Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Developmental Skills, better known as WaKIDS. Each of these tables I'll be showing you include 3 important pieces of information for the all students group and for each ESCA subgroup. The 3 pieces of important information are, number 1, the 3 most recent years of performance data. Secondly, the most recent goal for which we are assessing. And third, the cell labeled difference shows whether or not the goal was met. Groups that did not meet the goals are identified by the red highlighted cells, and the values in the cells quantify how far above or below the goal the group performed. A negative value means the group performance was below the goal, and a positive value means the group performance was higher than the goal. Here we see the analysis for the WaKIDS indicator. Even with modest gains in the fall of 2013, no group met their targets. So we say here that the Washington children are not on track to meet the 2020 midpoint goal for this key performance indicator. We used access to early childhood education from the American Community Survey for the national and peer state comparisons. This shows that access to early childhood education in Washington is low. In fact, Washington's attendance rate of 41% is the lowest of all the peer states and is substantially lower than the US average of 46%. Much work needs to be undertaken to expand access to early childhood education opportunities. Now let's take a look at the 3rd grade literacy indicator. In the initial report, the State Board of Education recommended the 3rd grade literacy rate as a key performance indicator to replace the 4th grade literacy rate. The measure here is the percentage of students who meet or exceed standards on the 3rd grade reading MSP. In 2014, the 3rd grade reading proficiency rate fell by about 1 percentage point, and you can see the gap reduction target was not met. The red cells on the right show the groups that failed to meet targets and by how much. See that the Asian, Hispanic Latino, and limited English subgroups were the only groups to meet or exceed their annual targets. Here's the analysis for the 4th grade reading indicator that was originally named in Senate Bill 5491. The red highlighted cells on the right indicate that no group met their annual target. The 4th grade NAEP in reading was used for the national and peer state comparison. You can see that the performance of Washington students is higher than the national average, but not in the top 10%, and it's the 2nd lowest of the peer states. We would conclude that the 3rd grade literacy indicator is not on target to meet the 2020 midpoint goal. So far, we've seen that neither the WaKIDS nor the 3rd grade literacy indicators are meeting targets. So now let's take a look at the 8th grade high school readiness and then the high school graduation indicators. The high school readiness measure is the percentage of students who meet or exceed standards on all 3 of the 8th grade MSPs in reading, math, and science. This is a very rigorous measure that was recommended by the State Board of Education in the initial report to replace the 8th grade math indicator named in Senate Bill 5491. See here the modest gains demonstrated in 2014 were not large enough to meet the gap reduction targets. Remember, the red highlighted cells indicate the groups that failed to meet their annual targets, and the values show you by how much the target was missed. Here's the analysis for the original indicator named in Senate Bill 5491. See that only the Asian and Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian groups met their annual targets. We used the 8th grade NAEP in reading and math for the peer state and national comparisons. Here's an analysis of the 8th grade NAEP in reading. And see here that Washington's performance on the 8th grade NAEP was not in the top 10% nationally, but the performance was comparable to the peer states. We can see here that Washington performance on the 8th grade NAEP in math was not in the top 10% nationally, but the performance was comparable to peer states. So the previous few charts and tables show that the 8th grade high school readiness indicator is not on track to meet the 2020 midpoint goal or the 2027 endpoint goal. The measure here is the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate, the percentage of students who graduate on time in 4 years. The red cells on the far right show you that no student group met their annual target. Here you see that these national and peer state comparisons are not favorable. We must conclude here that the high school graduation indicator is not on track to meet the 2020 midpoint or the 2027 endpoint goals. I'll next show you a few more slides for which the 2014 goal attainment cannot be ascertained because the 2014 data are not yet available. This indicator was recommended in the initial report to the legislature. The measure is the percentage of students attending good or better schools as measured by the Washington Achievement Index. See that the percentage of students at good or better schools increased to nearly 58% in 2013. The 2014 index will be the first year we can measure performance against gap reduction goals. The quality of high school diploma is measured as the percentage of high school students who graduate and who enroll in credit-bearing college coursework in the following year. In other words, this is the percentage of students who bypass remedial coursework in college. The ERDC is assembling a data file so that this analysis can be conducted. Since the data is pending, the goal attainment cannot be demonstrated one way or another. For a national and peer state comparison, we can use a study from Complete College America titled Remediation, Higher Education's Bridge to Nowhere that was published in 2012. This data is not directly comparable to the Senate Bill 5491 indicator, but it is similar. In this analysis, peer state data for Minnesota and New Jersey are not included in the data set. From this report, we can say a high percentage of Washington students bypass remedial college coursework, and this statement holds true for both 2-year and 4-year colleges. We can also say that Washington's performance is far above the national average and higher than the peer state average. For the quality of high school diploma indicator named in Senate Bill 5491, we can say that Washington ranks among the highest nationally and that Washington ranks higher than the peer state average. But we cannot determine whether the indicator is on track to meet the 2020 midpoint and the endpoint goals. Data are pending for the post-secondary attainment indicator. This graphic shows us two things. First, 4 5491 indicators of educational system health are not on track to meet their 2020 midpoint or the 2027 endpoint goals. And second, we can't determine whether or not 2 of the 5491 indicators are on track to meet the midpoint or endpoint goals. This is another view of the status of the educational system health indicators. The first biennial report to the legislature will be posted to the State Board of Education website on December 1st. The report will describe, number 1, the status of each indicator, number 2, the national and peer state comparisons, and 3, the report will include evidence-based reforms that the State Board recommends to improve the indicators not meeting their targets. Please contact me directly if you have any questions about this work.